Sailing, sailboats, and seafaring are all powerful images that suggest empowerment in our culture and are certainly worthy topics for seminars such as this one. As well, my own personal path to the sailing world is pretty unlikely, and as well, also an interesting story of empowerment. So we'll talk about my experiences in the sailing world here a little bit today, and what I learned there, but in reality, the most important message that I have about authentic empowerment comes not so much from my exploits in the sailing world, but why I actually quit sailing. But first, a little background. Now, I get asked all the time how it was that I got involved in sailing. It's pretty unlikely and uncommon, after all, for a kid from the Idaho desert to become a relatively famous sailor. You know, not a lot of opportunities exist. In my books, I offer a couple of explanations, mostly to enhance my pirate image, that involve beautiful, exotic, wild women, of course. And as most sea tales, they're only mostly true. But this afternoon, I will tell you the actual truth. My background in sailing can be traced directly to my deep-seated childhood desire to become an insurance salesman. Now, seriously, as a little kid, when I was asked the obligatory, Jay, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would respond enthusiastically, I want to work for Mutual of Omaha. And stunned looks, of course, right? Well, I mean, seriously, I was completely captivated by Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and Cousteau's voyages on Calypso and any other kind of nature show. And I was always absolutely captivated, especially by the magic of sea turtles. I mean, sea turtles, who can't absorb the magic of sea turtles? So from an early age, I did really dream of sailing off to a far-off land to sail with sea turtles. But I got to tell you, that wasn't any kind of easy path, really. I mean, this is Idaho, right? Not a lot of opportunities out there. I was forced to learn sailing out of old books that I could afford, used ones. The first boat that I ever went sailing on was a little 12-foot skiff that I built out of stuff that I got for the lumberyard. The first yacht that I ever owned was a 35-year-old wreck that I bought for a couple of $1,000 after living in an apple orchard for a couple of years in a tent. And the purchase of that boat completely wiped me out. Of course, the only reason I could actually afford that boat was it had a blown engine in it. But, you know, the old books that I had read told me that, well, you know, like, good sailors don't need engines anyway. And, and besides, the use of an engine will get in the way of the authenticity of your experience. And I certainly didn't want to do that. So not knowing any better, I just tore it out and forgot about it. So really, it worked out for me very well. I really lucked out. I got a path where I got to learn real authentic sailing. I got to learn to sail by wind and tide. And, well, that's history for me. Now, a lot of responsibility came with that, as I discovered quite quickly that in the yachting world, while some of maritime tradition was well preserved, the actual practical skills of handling sailing craft completely under sail was largely lost to history. And I felt and saw that there was a need there for somebody who was learning those skills to step up the plate and document and keep those skills alive. And that's what I did, and it was a lot of fun. And I got to teach a lot of people to sail, and that was more than reward enough for the hard work and time and sheer terror sometimes that it was required to learn to sail authentically. And I can tell you that on my last trip down the coast in a 52-foot, 17-ton gaff cutter that I had built myself, finally underway to sail with those turtles, I learned what real empowerment was really all about. And I have to say that that empowerment has changed me forever. So let's talk about the important stuff now, why I got out of sailing. It was all about the turtles, of course. Let's talk about what I do now. One will inevitably find themselves in a position of leadership when one looks to follow, when they come up wanting. Sailing, contrary to what many people believe, is really the art and science of harnessing weather. Now, in the sailing world today, engines allow most sailors the luxury of ignoring weather, largely. And because of that, they eliminate the authenticity of the experience for themselves, and they seldom learn very much about it. Now, I didn't have that luxury, so I learned about weather, sometimes kind of the hard way. But now the reward for that is a knowledge of weather runs in my blood. Now, any sailor worth his salt would have told you of the reality of climate change a decade ago and would have done so without hesitation. Today, it's only the willfully ignorant that can hide from that reality. I mean, forget the IPCC reports, forget the fancy broadcasts. All a person has to do is to have the engagement to walk outside and take an honest look anymore. Now, I, several years ago, became very concerned, gravely concerned, of the lack of progress that we were actually making towards any kind of progress to avert the catastrophe that's coming our way. And I mean, of course, there was plenty of eco-fabulous people running around, raising awareness, making documentaries, talking about how we, meaning you and I, could transition to a sustainable standard of living, one that the planet could actually absorb, while in many cases quite conspicuously and evidently making none of those transitions themselves. Now, the sea captain in me naturally scoffs at that, as no captain worth his salt would order his crew to undertake a task that he hasn't or personally wouldn't undertake himself. Look, I mean, this is basic leadership. This is the leadership of the empowered. If you're going to expect that people are going to follow you, it must be understood that you're going to be the one that's leading the charge. So I said to myself, you know, if all I can really find is talk, someone somewhere out there must take on the task of demonstrating what it might look like authentically to transfer to a kind of lifestyle the planet could indeed support. And who would be better suited to the task than somebody like myself who's successfully pursued his dreams and now is empowered enough to shoulder that responsibility, especially, frankly, as I have a unique advantage of being a person of a very modest background and modest means. And the average man or woman, those who need to hear this message most urgently, as they're in the position of most immediate peril, indeed, those people find nothing more compelling or more inspiring than the efforts of average, ordinary people achieving the extraordinary through sincere effort. So that's what I set out to do, and that's what I've done. And it's not flashy, but it's real. And like everything else I've done, it's been achieved on the most modest of incomes, working part-time, doing a little machinery or carpentry or what have you, and without any outside support, institutional backing, grants, or even debt. And this is important because the transition to a sustainable world must come from sustainable means. People now come to my place wanting to know what sustainable living looks like. And let me tell you, it isn't what the eco-fabulous will have you believe. There's this popular image of a gazillion square foot log cabin on a mountain someplace with solar panels and space-age insulation and windmills and electric cars and chrome-plated robots powered by cold fusion in their butts, dutifully picking organic strawberries. And let me tell you, that's bunk. That's just a sales pitch. See, if you take conservationism or good stewardship or sustainability and you take the authenticity out of it, you end up with a new kind of fashionable consumerism that's no better than the status quo. Now, we can't be doing that, right? So what does it look like? A lifestyle in harmony and scale with what the planet can bear, in the context of real, proven, non-pie-in-the-sky existing and applicable technology. Well, what do we think that looks like? It looks like modesty, mostly. It looks like people of skill, self-reliance, and empowerment shouldering the responsibility to steward their world. It looks a lot of times like a small cabin with an acre or two of garden, some chickens, and some constructive employment. It's completely doable. It's completely achievable. I mean, I know I'm there, and it's how I live my life. Now, it's not without sacrifice, of course. See, I'm not here selling anything, so I can tell you the straight dope. We are not going to transition to a sustainable world without personal sacrifice. For most of us in the Western world, that sacrifice is going to be significant. Nonetheless, this change must happen, and it will happen, with or without us. And the sooner we get started, the easier that transition will be. So I quit sailing to shoulder my responsibility to be at the forefront of an authentic movement to transition to a sustainable world. See, it's all about those turtles, I guess. and the knowledge that there's some young boy or girl out there with thick glasses, like I used to wear, who dreams of someday building and sailing a boat to a distant land to swim with turtles. And I know that if we do not get started soon enough, bearing our responsibility in the manner fitting of empowered people, if we continue on our path of childish indulgence and consumption and neglect of our responsibility to future generations, there is a very good chance that that young person will never get that chance. In fact, they may not get much of a chance at all. And I will be damned if I will let that happen on my watch. Empowerment. Look, today we're talking about empowerment. What constitutes real empowerment? In preparing this talked to dozens of people about what they thought real empowerment was. And I have to say that I was shocked, bewildered, and even dismayed by the responses I've got. I got all sorts of answers. I got answers like being rich, or financially secure, or being free, or following one's dreams, or joining the cosmic karmic consciousness, or owning your home, or having a raw food diet. I mean, that's all great and all, but come on, let's think about it. If following one's dreams and being unencumbered, unfettered, being free is the be-all and end-all of empowerment, in this wealthy country which we live, we'd all be buying a lot less crap to compensate for our obvious emptiness. If the popular self-help worldview is even remotely correct, my seafaring background brings me nothing to offer to you here, and I'd be better to just cede the stage now to some modern-day Marie Antoinette who can bring her shopping lists, and she can tell you what to buy and how much better you will feel for it. And I'm certain the experience will be most transcendent. Nonsense. If you take empowerment and you pull the authenticity out of it, you end up with just plain old indulgence, and you miss the important stuff entirely. See, when I think of empowerment, I don't think of Donald Trump. I don't think of the Chopra Center. I think of somebody like Nelson Mandela, a guy who is not known for a lot of bling, a guy who probably doesn't have a big collection of scented body oils. He probably has never even been to a seminar on empowerment. And I bet you he's not worried a great deal about the feng shui of his prison cell. But he is a guy who has shed everything for the responsibility to a just cause. And because of that, he comes across more empowered than any of us would ever hope to be. Now, I mean, does anybody really disagree with that? I mean, of course not. Freedom, all that other stuff. I mean, there's freedom in empowerment for sure, but in the same manner that there's freedom in sailing, meaning that you'll be absolutely as free as your responsibility to your crew and to your boat and to your navigational skills and your honest, objective worldview allow you to be, which generally isn't very much. I mean, if freedom is really what we're after, especially freedom from responsibility, I'll tell you, forget sailing, because you spend most of your time in the sailing world worried, cold, and broke. And you're way better off to just keep your day job and keep your head down and not worry about it. But if a person does go out to try to take on something inherently empowering like sailing, I mean, it wouldn't have to be sailing necessarily. It could be something equally empowering, like caring about humanity. It could be like caring about the future. It could be like caring about the planet. But if it's done authentically, squarely, honestly, personally, it will not take long at all before a person figures out what empowerment really brings. The greatest, most precious thing in the world. See, empowerment, when you find it, inevitably will bring you responsibility. And while that doesn't necessarily bring you freedom, it will bring you a sense of purpose. And I would suggest that purpose is really the thing that most of us today feel our lives lack. So let me tell you what my background in sailing taught me. I see the crowning jewel of real empowerment as nothing short of the courageous and heroic willingness to shoulder responsibility. In fact, I'd say the depth and breadth and cost of that commitment to responsibility is the very rule by which we measure empowerment. And what is the reward for this? It's a sense of purpose. It's a life of purpose. And the purpose of life is living a life of purpose. Really, and once one has tasted the purpose that authentic empowerment brings us, you could care less about your freedom or your finances or how liberated your mind is or whatever, because you've earned for yourself a reason to live, and now nothing will stand in your way. So, people, like it or not, humanity is mid-voyage, ill-prepared, in uncertain weather and shoal water, destined for unknown and potentially hostile shores. We must face this reality squarely, honestly, and personally. It is our watch. It is time that we as empowered individuals not just accept, but embrace heroically the personal responsibility to steward for a better future, actively and now. There is no other choice. And without that choice, there will be no future. Now, this is a grim voyage, and one few of us would have signed for sure, but it is where this canoe we share is headed. But allow me to leave you with an observation. Consider, is it not ironic in the extreme that the hard facts we must face, the very actions that we must undertake, the responsibilities that we must shoulder, those sacrifices we must make together to ensure some viability of the planet for future generations, those very actions are indeed also those that may serve best to empower our lives with hope and purpose? We have very nearly destroyed this planet attempting to hide from the insecurities of our lack of authentic empowerment. I suggest, if we seek what promise empowerment really holds, embracing that purpose, we'll save the turtles and the planet and ourselves. Thank you very much.